October 17th, 1969. The cameras rolled as Steve McQueen hit 95 mph down Mulholland Drive. Marcus Sullivan watched from behind the camera, knowing something was wrong with the Mustang's brakes. He'd checked them himself that morning. McQueen's car launched off the embankment at 11:47 a.m. The metal screamed. Glass exploded. Emergency crews took 43 minutes to cut him free. What happened in those 43 minutes changed everything. 3 witnesses vanished before police arrived. The brake line Mac had personally inspected showed signs of deliberate tampering, and when McQueen whispered something to Mac in the ambulance, something about the studio wanting him gone, Mac made a choice that haunted him for 54 years. The choice to stay silent. The choice that saved his life but destroyed his soul. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ambulance doors slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Mac's hands still trembled as he watched the red and white vehicle disappear around the bend, carrying Steve McQueen toward Cedars-Sinai with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and blood seeping from a gash across his forehead. The studio wanting him gone. Those words echoed in Mac's skull as he turned back to the twisted wreckage. The Mustang GT 390 Fastback, McQueen's pride and joy, hung suspended over the embankment like a metal carcass, its driver's side door peeled back like a sardine can. Chrome bumper twisted into modern art. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber hung thick in the October air. Detective Ray Morrison approached with his notepad already out. His tie loosened in the heat. "Hell of a thing, Mac. Thank God Steve's alive." Mac nodded, not trusting his voice. His eyes fixed on the brake line, the one he'd inspected at dawn, the one that had been solid and secure. Now it dangled loose, the metal sheared clean through. Too clean, too precise for mechanical. Failure. "You were his stunt coordinator on this picture?" Morrison's pen hovered over paper. "Yeah, 5 years running." Mac's throat felt like sandpaper. "We've done dozens of driving scenes together. Steve knows every inch of Mulholland. Any problems with the car this morning? Mechanical issues?" The question hung between them like smoke. Mac could feel the weight of truth pressing against his chest, demanding release. Tell him about the brake line. Tell him about the 3 men in suits who'd been watching from the tree line, the ones who vanished the moment sirens wailed up the canyon. Tell him about the phone call McQueen received at 6 a.m. that made his face go white. Instead, Mac shook his head. Car was perfect. Steve just took the turn too fast. Morrison scribbled something down. Sometimes even the best drivers get overconfident. Liar. The word screamed in Mac's head, directed at himself. But McQueen's whispered warning in the ambulance had been clear. Trust no one. Not the studio, not the police, no one. "We'll need the car towed for inspection," Morrison continued. "Standard procedure." "Of course." Mac watched a tow truck lumber up the winding road, wondering who'd arranged it so quickly, wondering whose pockets the driver's loyalty resided in. 20 minutes later, the Mustang disappeared on the back of a flatbed, taking evidence with it. The crash site looked almost peaceful now, just skid marks on asphalt and some scattered glass catching afternoon sunlight, like nothing had happened at all. Mac climbed into his '67 Camaro and sat there for a long moment, engine off, windows down. The Hollywood Hills stretched out below him, all swimming pools and red tile roofs hiding secrets in shadows. Somewhere down there, powerful men in mahogany-paneled offices were probably making phone calls, cleaning up loose ends, ensuring that certain truths stayed buried. His hands found the steering wheel and gripped tight. McQueen trusted him, had trusted him with his life every day for 5 years, and Mac had let him down when it mattered most. Should have seen it coming, should have known that McQueen's refusal to play ball with studio politics would eventually catch up to him. The king of cool had been getting too independent lately, demanding creative control, questioning contracts, talking about starting his own production company. Men had died for less in this town. Mac started the engine and pointed the Camaro toward Sunset Boulevard, but his mind remained fixed on those 43 minutes. 43 minutes when he could have told the first responders about the tampered brake line, could have demanded they preserve the evidence. Could have spoken the truth that burned in his throat like acid. Instead, he'd made his choice. The choice that would keep him alive but kill something vital inside him. The choice that meant Steve McQueen would officially become just another Hollywood cautionary tale about speed and recklessness, rather than the target of an assassination attempt. Traffic thickened as he reached the Strip. The usual circus of agents and starlets, dealers and dreamers, all chasing their version of the American fantasy. Mac had been part of that world for 15 years, coordinating stunts for the biggest names in pictures. Now it felt foreign, like observing someone else's life through dirty glass. His apartment waited in a complex off Fountain Avenue. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that barely qualified for the name. The message light on his answering machine blinked red. 3 calls from the studio. 2 from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. 1 from his ex-wife asking if he was all right. He didn't return any of them. Instead, Mac poured 3 fingers of bourbon and stood at his living room window, watching the sun set behind the Hollywood sign. Somewhere out there, Steve McQueen lay in a hospital bed, probably wondering if his stunt coordinator had gotten the message, probably hoping Mac was smart enough to keep his mouth shut. The bourbon burned going down, but not nearly as much as the silence. The bourbon glass sat empty on the windowsill by morning, forgotten amid the wreckage of a sleepless night. Mac had spent the dark hours pacing his apartment like a caged animal, replaying every detail from Mulholland Drive until the images burned permanent grooves in his memory. The severed brake line, McQueen's blood on shattered glass, the men in suits who'd vanished like smoke. Sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his living room floor. The answering machine's red light had stopped blinking, the tape full now with calls he couldn't bring himself to answer. Outside, Los Angeles was waking up to another day of manufactured dreams, while Mac sat at his kitchen table nursing black coffee and the weight of complicity. The morning paper lay folded beside his cup, McQueen's crash relegated to page 3 below the fold. Hollywood daredevil injured in canyon crash. The article painted it exactly as expected. Veteran actor loses control on notorious curve, hospitalized but expected to recover. No mention of brake lines or studio politics. Just another cautionary tale about speed and celebrity excess. Mac's phone rang at 8:15. He let it go to the machine, listening through the thin bedroom wall as his own voice invited the caller to leave a message. After the beep came a sound that made his blood freeze, his daughter's voice, small and uncertain. "Daddy? It's Jenny. I heard about the accident on the radio. They said Steve McQueen crashed and They said you were there." A pause, the distant hum of traffic in the background. "I'm scared for you. This town, these people. Please call me back. I'm at the Sunset Motel on Vine, room 12. I love you." The line went dead, leaving Mac staring at the coffee cup in his hands. Jenny, 23 years old with her mother's stubborn streak and her father's unfortunate talent for finding trouble. She'd come to Hollywood 6 months ago with a suitcase full of headshots and dreams bigger than Texas, despite Mac's warnings about the machinery that ground up pretty girls and spit out broken women. He'd barely seen her since the divorce 3 years ago. Caroline had made sure of that, painting him as the absent father who chose Hollywood stunts over family dinners, dangerous men over soccer games. She wasn't entirely wrong. But Jenny had always been different. His little girl who preferred go-karts to dollhouses, who asked him to explain how movie crashes were filmed instead of asking for bedtime stories. Mac pushed back from the table and grabbed his keys. The Sunset Motel squatted between a pawn shop and a taco stand on the seedy stretch of Vine where dreams came to die. Paint peeled from its walls like sunburned skin, and the neon sign flickered with the persistence of a dying heartbeat. Mac had driven past it 1,000 times without seeing it. Another piece of invisible Los Angeles infrastructure housing the desperate and forgotten. Room 12 sat at the far end of the complex, its door painted institutional green and scarred with decades of hard living. Mac knocked twice, soft enough not to wake neighboring tenants who might be sleeping off night shifts or hangovers. Jenny opened the door wearing a faded UC Berkeley sweatshirt and jeans with holes at the knees. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, Mac's own hazel eyes, carried the particular exhaustion that came from trying too hard in an unforgiving city. "Daddy!" She fell into his arms without hesitation, and for a moment Mac felt something loosening in his chest. Here was what mattered. Here was what he'd risk everything to protect. The motel room smelled of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. A narrow bed dominated the space, covered with a polyester bedspread that had seen better decades. Jenny's few possessions were arranged with heartbreaking care. Headshots stacked neatly on the dresser, a dog-eared copy of Stella Adler on acting beside the lamp, a framed photo of the two of them from her high school graduation. "How long have you been here?" Mac asked, though he already dreaded the answer. 2 weeks. Jenny sat on the bed's edge, pulling her knees to her chest. "The apartment I was sharing, the other girl got a part in a soap opera and moved to a better place. I couldn't make rent alone." Mac felt the familiar surge of protective fury, the same instinct that had driven him to perfect every stunt, calculate every risk, ensure that actors under his care went home safe each night. But he'd failed to protect his own daughter from Hollywood's casual cruelties. "You should have called sooner. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own." Her smile carried echoes of the fearless child who'd insisted on learning motorcycle maintenance at age 12. "Besides, you've had your own problems. That crash yesterday. Daddy, what really happened up there?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Mac studied his daughter's face, seeing too much intelligence in her eyes, too much of his own stubborn need for truth. She deserved honesty, but honesty might get her killed. "Steve took a turn too fast," Mac said finally. Simple as that. But Jenny's expression told him she wasn't buying the official story any more than he was. The silence stretched between them until Jenny reached for something on the nightstand, a manila envelope Mac hadn't noticed before. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like someone handling evidence. "This was slipped under my door last night," she said, extending the envelope toward him. "Around midnight. I heard footsteps in the hallway, but by the time I looked out, whoever it was had gone." Mac's hands went cold as he took the envelope. No postmark, no return address. Just Jenny's name written in block letters across the front with black ink. The paper felt expensive, heavy stock that didn't belong in a place like the Sunset Motel. "Have you opened it?" "I was waiting for you." Jenny's voice carried an edge he'd never heard before. "Something told me it was about yesterday, about what really happened on that mountain." Mac's fingers found the envelope's flap, already partially torn. The adhesive had been slit cleanly, professionally. Inside, his fingertips encountered the smooth surface of photographs. He pulled them out slowly, and the world tilted sideways. The first photograph showed McQueen's Mustang from an angle Mac remembered with crystal clarity, the exact moment before impact, captured from somewhere in the tree line. But that was impossible. The only people present had been Mac, the camera crew, and— his breath caught. In the background of the photo, barely visible through the Mustang's rear window, was a figure Mac recognized, a face he'd tried to forget for 24 hours but would remember for the rest of his life. Tommy Torino, studio fixer, the man who made problems disappear. The second photograph was worse. It showed the Mustang's undercarriage after the crash, brake line clearly visible and clearly severed. The cut was precise, professional. Not the ragged tear of mechanical failure, but the clean slice of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Jesus Christ," Mac whispered. Jenny leaned closer, studying the photos over his shoulder. "That's not mechanical failure, is it?" Mac's hands shook as he flipped to the third photograph. This one had been taken from ground level, showing Mac himself standing beside Detective Morrison. But it was the background that made his blood freeze. 3 men in dark suits walking away from the crash site, their faces turned away from the camera. Professional, organized, gone before anyone could ask questions. A folded piece of paper fell from the envelope as Mac shuffled through the photographs. Jenny picked it up and read aloud. "Mr. Sullivan, these photos were taken by someone who cared about the truth, someone who knew what really happened that day but couldn't speak then. They're dead now, but they wanted you to have proof. The man who ordered this is still alive, still powerful, still dangerous. He knows about your daughter. Keep quiet and she stays safe. Start talking, and room 12 becomes a crime scene. You have 48 hours to decide what matters more, justice for McQueen or your daughter's life. Choose wisely." The paper slipped from Jenny's fingers, floating to the stained motel carpet like a feather. Max stared at it, his mind racing through implications and calculations, the same way he'd once analyzed stunt sequences for maximum impact and minimum risk. Someone had photographed the entire conspiracy, had documented Tommy Torino's presence, the sabotage brake line, the cleanup crew, had sat on that evidence for 24 hours while Mac told himself he was protecting McQueen by staying silent. Now that same evidence was being used as a weapon against his daughter. "Daddy?" Jenny's voice seemed to come from far away. "What does this mean? Who's Tommy Torino?" Mac looked at her, really looked, and saw the child who'd trusted him to keep her safe from monsters under the bed, from bullies at school, from all the casual cruelties of growing up. Now the biggest monster of all had found her, and it was Mac's own past that had led it straight to room 12. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "What?" "Pack everything. Now. We're leaving." Jenny didn't move. "Not until you tell me what's happening. These photos, someone tried to kill Steve McQueen, didn't they? And you know who it was." Mac stood, photograph still clutched in his hands. Through the motel window, he could see traffic moving along Vine Street, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that 50 feet away, the past was reaching out with bloody fingers to drag 2 more victims into its embrace. "There are things in this town," Mac said finally, "that kill people for asking the right questions. And baby girl, you just asked the rightest question of all." He walked to the window and peered through the blinds. A black sedan sat parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted dark. It hadn't been there when he arrived. They were already being watched. Jenny appeared beside him, following his gaze. When she spoke, her voice carried the same steel that had once made her demand motorcycle lessons at 12 years old. "Then I guess we better start finding some answers." Mac's first instinct was to run. Get Jenny out of that death trap motel, drive until they hit desert, keep moving until the black sedan became a memory. But as he watched his daughter stuff clothes into a battered suitcase, that familiar stubborn set to her jaw told him running wouldn't solve anything. Jenny Sullivan had inherited more than his eyes. She'd gotten his need to face trouble head on, even when backing down was the smart play. "We can't just disappear," Jenny said, as if reading his thoughts. "These people, whoever they are, they found me once. They'll find me again." Mac wanted to argue, but the photographs felt heavy in his jacket pocket. Someone had been watching that day on Mulholland Drive. Someone with a telephoto lens and patience enough to document a conspiracy. Now that someone was dead, and their evidence had become a threat wrapped in manila paper. "There's a diner on Sunset," Mac said finally. "Neutral ground. We need to think this through." The black sedan followed them 3 blocks behind, professional enough to maintain distance, but close enough to send a message. Mac caught glimpses of it in his rearview mirror as they wound through Hollywood's side streets, never the same car twice, but always there. A rotating surveillance team with resources and coordination. Mel's Diner squatted beneath a neon sign that had been flickering since the Eisenhower administration. The kind of place where night shift workers grabbed coffee before heading home, where conversations got lost in the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the griddle. Mac chose a booth in the back corner, positioning himself to watch both entrances while keeping Jenny's back to the wall. She ordered coffee. He ordered time. "Start with Tommy Torino," Jenny said, wrapping her hands around her cup for warmth the overworked air conditioning had stolen. The note mentioned him specifically. Mac glanced around the diner. A tired waitress refilled mugs at the counter, a trucker hunched over eggs and bacon, reading a paper. Nobody paying attention, but Mac had learned yesterday that eyes could watch from anywhere. "Studio fixer," he said quietly. "The man they call when problems need solving permanently." What kind of problems? Actors who don't want to renew contracts. Directors who ask too many questions about financing. Anyone who threatens the machine. Mac's voice dropped even lower. McQueen was getting independent, talking about starting his own production company. That makes him a problem. Jenny leaned forward, and Mac saw his own investigative instincts reflected in her expression. She'd always been the kid who took apart radios to see how they worked, who asked follow-up questions until adults got uncomfortable and changed the subject. "But you've worked with him for 5 years. Surely the studio trusts you." I'm muscle, baby girl. Hired help. The day I become inconvenient is the day I join the list of problems needing solutions. As if summoned by his words, the diner's bell chimed and a familiar figure entered. Eddie Torino, Tommy's younger brother and errand boy, all cheap cologne and cheaper suits. He slid into the booth behind Jenny without invitation, close enough that Mac could smell the cigarettes on his breath. "Max Sullivan," Eddie said conversationally, as if they'd bumped into each other at a barbecue. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday." Jenny started to turn around, but Mac caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Eddie's presence here wasn't coincidence, it was a demonstration. They could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. "Just doing my job, Eddie." "That's what we like to hear." Eddie's voice carried the casual menace of a man who'd never had to make good on his own threats. His brother's reputation did the heavy lifting. Course, sometimes doing your job means knowing when to stop asking questions, when to let sleeping dogs lie. The waitress approached their table, but something in Eddie's expression made her veer away toward other customers. Mac felt the familiar weight of Hollywood power, the ability to clear rooms and silence conversations with nothing more than presence and reputation. "Steve's recovering nicely," Eddie continued, "talking about getting back to work soon. Real professional attitude, understanding that accidents happen, especially on dangerous shoots. Glad to hear it. Thing is, Mac, accidents have a way of spreading, like a contagion. One day it's a brake line, next day it's a gas leak in a motel room. Day after that, maybe a young actress has a bad reaction to some pills she never took." Eddie's reflection appeared in the diner window, ghostly and threatening. "You understand what I'm saying?" Mac understood perfectly. The photographs in his pocket felt radioactive, evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of studio management, evidence that could destroy careers and send powerful men to prison, if it ever saw daylight. "Crystal clear," Mac said. Eddie stood, dropping a $5 bill on their table. "Coffee's on me." "Oh, and Mac? That documentary woman who's been sniffing around, asking questions about old stunts? She's been told to focus on other projects. Permanently." Then he was gone, leaving behind the scent of menace and the sound of Jenny's sharp intake of breath. Ready to snap. Jenny's coffee had gone cold, her knuckles white where she gripped the cup. Mac watched Eddie's reflection disappear from the diner window, but the threat lingered like smoke in an airless room. "Documentary woman?" Jenny's voice was barely a whisper. Mac felt something cold settle in his stomach. The pieces were clicking together. The photographs, the timing, the professional surveillance. Someone had been building a case, gathering evidence. Someone who'd gotten too close to the truth. "Sarah Chen," he said slowly. "Film student from USC. She's been interviewing stunt coordinators about the old days. Called me last week wanting to talk about dangerous shoots, close calls." He paused, remembering the earnest voice on the phone, the careful questions about safety protocols in the 60s. Christ, she must have found something. Jenny set down her cup with deliberate precision. "Past tense, Daddy." Eddie said, "had been sniffing around." And that bit about focusing on other projects permanently, the implication hung between them like a death sentence. Mac thought about the photographs in his pocket. Someone who cared about the truth, someone who knew what really happened but couldn't speak then, someone who is dead now. Sarah Chen, 22 years old with a film degree, and too much curiosity for her own good. "We need to find her," Jenny said, but Mac was already shaking his head. "Baby, if Eddie's talking past tense, then we need to find out what happened to her. She had those photographs, Daddy. She was trying to expose this thing." Jenny's voice carried a determination that reminded Mac painfully of her mother during their worst fights. That absolute certainty that the right thing was the only thing, consequences be damned. Mac felt the familiar weight of impossible choices. Stay silent and let Sarah Chen become another forgotten casualty. Speak up and watch his daughter join her. The mathematics of survival had never felt more brutal. "You don't understand what we're dealing with," he said. "These aren't movie villains, Jenny. They're businessmen protecting billion-dollar investments. They'll kill you and sleep soundly because it's just another line item in the ledger. Then why give us the photographs at all? Why not just make us disappear quietly?" It was a good question, too good. Max studied his daughter's face and saw the sharp intelligence that had always made her dangerous to underestimate. She was thinking like an investigator now, parsing motives and strategies instead of just reacting to threats. "Insurance," he said finally. "Someone else has copies. If we disappear, those photos go public. But if we play along, stay quiet, everyone goes home happy. Except Sarah Chen, except Steve McQueen, except whoever else they've buried over the years." Jenny leaned forward, her voice dropping to match his whisper. "How many people have died to keep this secret?" Mac thought about Tommy Torino's reputation, the whispered stories that circulated through Hollywood's back channels. Actors who'd died in convenient accidents, directors who'd suffered sudden heart attacks, screenwriters who'd taken long walks off short piers. The city's history was written in blood, but nobody talked about it because talking was how you joined the casualty list. More than you want to know. The diner's bell chimed again, and Mac's hand instinctively moved toward his jacket, old reflexes from a younger man's wars. But it was just a businessman in a rumpled suit, sliding into a corner booth with a newspaper and the weary look of someone working graveyard shifts. Still, Mac felt exposed. Eddie's visit had been a message, but it was also reconnaissance. They knew where to find him, knew about Jenny's motel room, knew enough to orchestrate this entire theater of intimidation. Staying in one place too long was asking for a more permanent solution to their problem. "We need to move," he said. "Get you somewhere safe while I figure out our options." "Our options?" Jenny's laugh held no humor. "Daddy, you keep talking like I'm some helpless little girl who needs protecting. But I'm the one they targeted. I'm the one who got the photographs. Maybe it's time you started thinking of me as a partner instead of a victim." The words hit Mac like a physical blow. He saw his daughter clearly for the first time. Not the 12-year-old who'd wanted motorcycle lessons. Not the teenager who'd cried when her parents divorced, but the young woman who'd been surviving on her own in Hollywood for 6 months. Who'd been living in a motel for 2 weeks without asking for help. Who'd faced down anonymous threats with enough composure to wait for him before opening that envelope. Jenny Sullivan was tougher than he'd given her credit for, which made her infinitely more dangerous to the people who wanted this buried. "They'll kill you," he said simply. "They'll try." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "But first they have to catch me, and I learned from the best." Outside, the black sedan drifted past the diner's windows like a mechanical shark. Mac watched it disappear around the corner, but he knew it would circle back. They always did. The hunter had become the hunted, and the game was just beginning. The black sedan made its third pass as Mac calculated angles of escape, but Jenny was already moving. She stood with the fluid grace of someone who'd inherited more than his stubborn streak. She'd gotten his tactical mind, too. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, sliding back into the booth. Her voice carried a weight that made Mac's chest tighten. "About how I really got those photographs." Mac felt the world shift slightly, the way it did right before a stunt went wrong. "What do you mean?" Jenny pulled out a small tape recorder, the kind film students used for interviews. Her fingers trembled as she pressed rewind, and Mac heard the mechanical whir of conversations spinning backward through time. "Sarah Chen didn't just call you last week, Daddy. She called me 6 months ago, right after I moved to Hollywood. Said she was researching stunt families, wanted to interview the daughter of the legendary Mac Sullivan." Jenny's laugh was bitter. "I was so hungry for any connection to this industry, I said yes immediately." The recorder clicked to a stop. Jenny pressed play. "Just need to understand what your father saw that day. The official report says mechanical failure, but my sources suggest..." Mac's blood turned to ice. That wasn't Sarah Chen's voice on the tape. It was Jenny's. "I can't get him to talk about it. The McQueen crash destroyed something in him. But if you have evidence, real evidence that it wasn't an accident..." Jenny hit stop, her face pale in the diner's fluorescent light. "I've been feeding her information for months, Daddy. Every story you ever told me about that day, every detail you let slip when you'd been drinking and missing Mom, I gave it all to her." Max stared at his daughter, feeling the weight of betrayal settle in his bones like winter cold. Every conversation they'd had, every moment of trust, she'd been mining it for someone else. Someone who'd gotten herself killed asking the wrong questions. "Jesus, Jenny, do you understand what you've done? I thought I was helping. Sarah said she was exposing a cover-up, that powerful people had silenced witnesses. She said you were a hero who deserved to have his story told. Tears tracked down Jenny's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. I never thought, I didn't know it would get her killed. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Sarah Chen hadn't stumbled onto the conspiracy. She'd been led to it by Mac's own daughter, armed with inside information that only a family member could provide. The photographs, the evidence, the perfect timing of Jenny's arrival in Hollywood. None of it was coincidence. The note, Mac said slowly. The one with the photographs. Read it again. Jenny unfolded the paper with shaking hands. These photos were taken by someone who cared about the truth. Someone who knew what really happened that day but couldn't speak then. That's not about some mysterious photographer, Mac realized. That's about me. Sarah was betting that you could get me to talk, get me to confirm what really happened. She was using you to get to me. The betrayal cut both ways now. Jenny had unknowingly served him up to a documentary filmmaker, but Sarah Chen had manipulated a lonely young woman desperate for connection and purpose. Everyone had been playing games with incomplete information, and now two people were dead. McQueen nearly, Sarah actually. Daddy, I'm so sorry. Don't. Mac held up a hand, his mind racing through new calculations. If Jenny had been talking to Sarah for months, then Tommy Torino's people had probably been watching both of them. The surveillance, the photographs, the perfectly timed pressure. They'd known about Jenny's involvement from the beginning, which meant this was never about silencing the truth. This was about something else entirely. Mac pulled out the photographs again, studying them with fresh eyes. The angles were too perfect, too convenient. Professional surveillance photos didn't usually capture incriminating evidence so clearly. They captured faces for identification, license plates for tracking, patterns for planning, unless someone wanted this evidence to surface. The man who ordered this is still alive, Mac read from the note. Still powerful, still dangerous. He looked up at Jenny, seeing the manipulation with crystal clarity now. What if we've been reading this wrong? What if these photos weren't meant to expose the conspiracy? What do you mean? Mac thought about Eddie Torino's casual confidence, the way he'd walked into the diner like a man without enemies, the way he'd mentioned Sarah Chen's death without concern or fear, like someone discussing the weather. What if they were meant to frame someone else for it? Outside, the black sedan had stopped circling. It sat parked across the street now, windows down, occupants visible for the first time. Two men in cheap suits, watching the diner with the patience of people who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Mac recognized one of them. Detective Morrison, 24 hours older and 50 pounds heavier, but still the same cop who'd written up McQueen's crash as mechanical failure. The hunter had become the hunted all right, but Mac was beginning to suspect they'd been hunting the wrong prey all along. Mac's hands went cold as Detective Morrison stepped out of the sedan, adjusting his jacket with the deliberate movements of a man preparing for unpleasant work. 24 hours had aged him decades, the weight of carrying someone else's secrets written in every line of his face. We need to leave. Now. Mac stood, but Jenny grabbed his wrist. Wait. Look at him, Daddy. Really look. Morrison walked like a man going to his own execution. His shoulders sagged under some invisible burden, and when he paused at the diner's entrance, Mac saw something that stopped him cold: fear. The same bone-deep terror Mac had been carrying for 54 years. He's not here to arrest us, Jenny whispered. He's here to warn us. The bell chimed as Morrison entered, scanning the diner with cop's eyes that cataloged exits and potential threats. When his gaze found Mac's booth, his expression shifted to something like relief. Mac Sullivan. Morrison's voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. We need to talk. Last time we talked, you buried the truth about McQueen's crash. Last time we talked, I saved both our lives. Morrison slid into the booth beside Jenny, uninvited but somehow welcome. Tommy Torino wanted you dead that day. I convinced him you were more valuable alive, a witness who could be controlled. Mac felt the world tilt again. You worked for Torino? Work. Present tense. Morrison's laugh held no humor. 24 years of taking his money, burying his problems, looking the other way when convenient accidents happened. But this Sarah Chen thing, he shook his head. This is different. Jenny leaned forward, her investigator's instincts overriding caution. Different how? Morrison pulled out a manila envelope, identical to the one Jenny had received. Inside were more photographs, different angles of the same crash, but these showed something the others hadn't, a second car, barely visible in the background. A black Cadillac with distinctive chrome trim. Tommy's car, Mac breathed. Tommy's car, but not Tommy driving it. Morrison pointed to a figure barely visible in the driver's seat. That's Vincent Kellerman, studio head, the man who really ordered the hit. The revelation hit Mac like a physical blow. Vincent Kellerman, the silver-haired executive who'd shaken his hand at industry parties, who'd sent flowers when Mac's wife died, who'd been playing the role of benevolent studio patriarch for 40 years. Torino's just muscle, Morrison continued. Always has been. But he's getting old, getting sloppy, starting to think about confessions and deathbed redemptions. Kellerman can't allow that, so he's cleaning house, Jenny said, pieces clicking together. Sarah Chen, maybe Tommy next, maybe all of us. Morrison's fingers drummed nervously on the table. I got word this morning. Kellerman's calling it legacy protection. Anyone who knows about the McQueen job gets retired permanently. Mac thought about Eddie Torino's casual confidence at the diner. Not the swagger of a man in control, but the false bravado of someone trying to convince himself he wasn't next on the list. The photographs weren't meant to expose the conspiracy or frame someone else. They were meant to flush out everyone who knew the truth so Kellerman could eliminate them systematically. The note, Mac said suddenly. Someone who cared about the truth but couldn't speak then. That's not about me or some photographer. It's about Tommy, Morrison finished. He's dying. Lung cancer. 6 months, maybe less. He wants to clean his conscience before he meets his maker, but Kellerman got wind of it. So, Tommy sent us the photographs? Insurance policy. If he disappears, if he has another convenient accident, the evidence goes public. Morrison's expression darkened. Problem is, Kellerman's decided the insurance isn't worth the risk. Outside, more cars had arrived. Not the obvious surveillance vehicles they'd been seeing, but ordinary sedans and panel trucks. A coordinated operation designed to look like random traffic until it was too late to escape. Jenny counted them with professional precision. 6 vehicles, probably 3 men each. They're not planning to arrest us. No, Morrison agreed grimly. They're planning to solve several problems at once, make it look like a conspiracy between dirty cops and blackmailing stuntmen. Case closed, reputation protected, legacy secure. Mac felt the familiar weight of impossible choices, but this time the mathematics were clearer. Run and they'd hunt him forever. Fight and his daughter would die alongside him. Surrender and maybe she'd live long enough for someone to ask inconvenient questions. There's a fourth option, Morrison said quietly, reading Mac's expression. We give Kellerman what he really wants, which is... Morrison smiled, and for the first time since entering the diner, he looked like a cop who'd found the solution to an unsolvable case. Tommy Torino's confession, tonight, on tape, with enough detail to bury Kellerman so deep he'll never dig himself out. The point of no return stretched before them like a canyon too wide to cross and too deep to survive falling into. But sometimes the only way out was through. Mac looked at his daughter, seeing not the child he'd failed to protect but the partner he'd never expected to find. Let's go catch ourselves a studio executive. The warehouse district after midnight felt like a graveyard of broken dreams, abandoned sound stages and empty production facilities where Hollywood's golden age had come to die. Mac guided Morrison's unmarked police car through streets slick with coastal fog, while Jenny monitored police frequencies on the scanner they'd borrowed from Morrison's glove compartment. 2 blocks ahead, Morrison said, checking his watch. Tommy should be waiting. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Get Tommy Torino's confession on tape, use it to force Kellerman into the open, then let the old studio head's paranoia destroy him. But Mac had learned long ago that elegant plans usually collapsed at first contact with reality. Signals clean, Jenny reported. No chatter about our location. Yet. Mac pulled into the shadow of a defunct backlot, killing the engine. Through the windshield, he could see the warehouse where Tommy had agreed to meet, a hulking structure that had once housed Western sets and now sheltered only rats and memories. Morrison checked his service weapon with the mechanical precision of a man preparing for his last stand. Kellerman's got 20 men in the field tonight. Even if we get the confession, getting out alive is another problem entirely. Mac thought about the weight of his own gun beneath his jacket. A 38 Special he'd carried since his stunt days, when practical effects sometimes required practical protection. 54 years of secrets had led to this moment, and he felt the strange calm that came before impossible stunts. Jenny stays in the car, he decided. Engine running, ready to move. Like hell I do. His daughter's voice carried steel that reminded Mac painfully of her mother. I got us into this mess. I'm seeing it through. Before Mac could argue, movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the warehouse. Tall, silver-haired, moving with the measured confidence of a man accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. Vincent Kellerman, alone, apparently unarmed, and walking toward their car like he owned the night. Son of a bitch, Morrison breathed. He's here. Mac felt puzzle pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The meeting location, the timing, Tommy's sudden willingness to confess. Kellerman had orchestrated all of it, not to silence the truth, but to gather everyone who knew it in one place for final elimination. It's a trap, Jenny whispered. No, Mac said, watching Kellerman's approach. It's better than that. It's an ending. Kellerman stopped 10 feet from the car, close enough for conversation but far enough to avoid sudden movements. When he spoke, his voice carried the same cultured authority Mac remembered from industry parties 40 years ago. Mac Sullivan, you look exactly like what you are, a man who's been running from the truth for most of his life. Mac rolled down his window, keeping his hands visible. The truth? You mean the part where you tried to murder Steve McQueen? Murder? Kellerman's laugh was genuinely amused. My dear fellow, I was protecting him. Steve had gotten himself tangled up with some very dangerous people. People who would have killed him slowly and publicly if I hadn't intervened. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly calibrated, that Mac almost believed it himself. This was how Kellerman had survived 40 years in Hollywood, by rewriting reality until even he believed his own fiction. You cut his brake lines. I arranged a controllable accident that would remove him from harm's way, while appearing to satisfy his enemies. Steve was never supposed to be seriously injured. Kellerman's expression shifted, showing what might have been genuine regret. The fact that he was hurt, that his career suffered, those were unintended consequences of a necessary intervention. Jenny leaned forward from the back seat. What about Sarah Chen? Was killing her another unintended consequence? Kellerman's gaze shifted to her with the focused attention of a predator recognizing new prey. Ah, the daughter. Tell me, Miss Sullivan, do you really believe your father is the hero in this story? Do you know what he was doing the day before Steve's crash? Mac felt his world beginning to crumble as Kellerman reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for another manila envelope. Your father was taking money from Tommy Torino. $50,000 to ensure that McQueen's stunt went wrong at exactly the right moment. Kellerman's smile was sharp as a blade. You see, Mac wasn't trying to protect Steve McQueen. He was the one who sabotaged that car. The photographs spilled across the car's hood, grainy surveillance shots that showed Mac accepting a briefcase from Tommy Torino, Mac working alone on McQueen's Mustang the night before the crash, Mac standing in the background as paramedics loaded his broken friend into an ambulance. The truth, Miss Sullivan, is that your father has spent 54 years living with guilt not because he failed to prevent a murder, but because he committed one. The only reason Steve McQueen survived is because Mac's own conscience made him sabotage his sabotage, loosening brake lines just enough to cause an accident, not quite enough to guarantee death. Mac looked at his daughter's face and saw his own reflection in her horrified eyes. The weight of the real truth settled on his chest like a gravestone, heavier than any secret he'd carried, more crushing than any lie he'd told himself. I'm sorry, baby, he whispered. I'm so goddamn sorry. The silence stretched between them like a wound that refused to heal, Jenny's face had gone pale, but her eyes never left Mac's. In that look, he saw not the disgust or betrayal he'd expected, but something worse, understanding. The pieces of her childhood suddenly rearranging themselves into a different picture. The late-night drinking, the self-loathing, the way he'd flinched whenever McQueen's name appeared on television. "Daddy," she said quietly, and the word carried no judgment, only exhaustion. Kellerman watched the exchange with satisfaction. A director pleased with his actors' performances. The beautiful thing about the truth, Miss Sullivan, is how it makes everything else make sense. Why your father disappeared from Hollywood, why he buried himself in that pathetic garage, why he never fought the stories that painted him as a has-been drunk. Mac felt Morrison's hand on his shoulder. Not restraint, but support. The old detective had known, probably always known. "Get to the point, Kellerman," Morrison said. "You didn't arrange this reunion for father-daughter bonding." Kellerman's smile faded. "I arranged it because secrets have weight, and some secrets become too heavy to carry alone. Tommy Torino is dying, and dying men develop inconvenient consciences. He wants to confess, to clear his name by destroying everyone else's." From the warehouse came movement. Tommy himself, flanked by two men who moved like professional bodyguards. But even at this distance, Mac could see the cancer eating him alive. The powerful crime figure he'd known had withered into a scarecrow held upright by will and medication. "Tommy's going to tell the FBI everything," Kellerman continued. "About the studio's gambling debts, about the protection money, about how we used Mac here to solve both problems at once. One engineered accident that would satisfy the Eastern families and save the studio from bankruptcy." Jenny found her voice again. "So, you kill everyone who knows?" "I prefer to think of it as career counseling." Kellerman gestured toward the warehouse. "Tommy dies of his cancer, which happens tonight instead of next month. Detective Morrison suffers a tragic accident investigating police corruption. And the Sullivan family, well, some stories about estranged fathers and desperate daughters write themselves." Mac studied the tactical situation with a stuntman's eye for danger and opportunity. 6 exits from the warehouse district, all likely blocked. Unknown number of Kellerman's people in position. 3 civilians against professional killers. But Kellerman had made one mistake. He was here personally, close enough to touch. Men who lived in boardrooms sometimes forgot that violence was intimate work. "There's just one problem with your story," Mac said, slowly reaching for his door handle. "You're assuming Tommy wants to confess to clear his conscience." Kellerman's confidence flickered. What else would he want? Mac smiled for the first time in days. Revenge. The warehouse erupted in gunfire. Not the controlled elimination Kellerman had orchestrated, but chaotic violence as Tommy Torino's dying declaration became a different kind of confession. Through the muzzle flashes, Mac saw the truth of it. Tommy hadn't come to surrender to the FBI. He'd come to settle accounts with the man who'd used him for 40 years. Kellerman dove for cover behind the car as his carefully planned execution dissolved into warfare. Mac grabbed Jenny's hand, pulling her toward the nearest building while Morrison provided covering fire. Behind them, Hollywood's last great secret was dying in bullets and blood. They made it to an abandoned soundstage before the shooting stopped. In the sudden quiet, Mac could hear sirens approaching. Real police, not Kellerman's people. Someone had called in the massacre. "It's over," Jenny said. And Mac heard the weight of years settling in her voice. "Yeah." He looked at his daughter, seeing not the child he'd failed, but the woman who'd found him anyway. "I'm sorry about your mother, about the drinking, about all of it." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "I've known for years, Daddy. Not the details, but the weight. You've been carrying it alone too long." Morrison appeared from the smoke, his face grim but relieved. "Kellerman's dead. Tommy, too. Most of the others." He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "It's finished." The approaching sirens grew louder, bringing with them the promise of questions Mac would finally answer. Not the whole truth. Some secrets were meant to die with the men who carried them, but enough truth to matter. As they waited for the authorities, Mac thought about Steve McQueen, probably sleeping peacefully in some distant grave, finally free of the weight of other men's choices. The King of Cool had never known how many people had claimed ownership of his death and resurrection. Maybe that was mercy. The first police car rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the fog like spotlights on a stage where the final curtain had already fallen. Max Sullivan stepped into the light, ready at last to tell his story.